Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. It is time for yet again another true crime video, and today we will be diving into a cold case. Today we will be talking about the unsolved murder of former beauty queen Jean Perera Sinnappa. Jean Perera Sinnappa was born in 1948 in Negari Sembilan, Malaysia. Starting from a young age, she was always described to be independent and strong-willed. At one point in her childhood, she was even sent to a convent as punishment for being a naughty kid. However, during her teenage years, her personality completely changed, and she began joining multiple beauty pageants, earning her various titles in the pageantry industry. In 1971, Jean became the first runner-up of the Miss Malaysia pageant. And after years of reigning as a beauty queen, Jean finished her studies and became a science teacher. In this school, she met a man named Sivapakyam Karthigesu, who she later became good friends with. Now, at work, people noticed how close they were getting, but their relationship was always described as a will they, won't they type of situation. And this just ended when Karthigesu introduced Jean to his brother, Sivapakyam Sinnappa, who she would later marry. Jean and Sinnappa had 3 children together, and they were very happy. However, on New Year's Eve in 1978, tragedy struck. As the couple were headed home from a New Year's Eve party, they got into a car accident that ultimately killed Sinnappa, leaving Jean a widow at only 30 years old. After this tragic turn of events, Jean and her 3 kids moved in with her mother-in-law. Karthigesu, Jean's brother-in-law and good friend, also lived with them in the same house. Not long after Sinnappa's death, Karthigesu and Jean actually fell in love and were planning to get married. However, before they even could, tragedy struck again. Before midnight on April 6, 1979, airline employees on the way home from work spots a man laying face down on the side of the road next to a car. The man was breathing heavily but seemed to be uninjured. They checked his car only to see a woman on the passenger seat with blood all over her, obviously no longer alive. Now, these airline employees called for help, and once dispatchers arrived, they quickly took the man to a nearby hospital while the woman, who was confirmed to be deceased, was brought to the mortuary. They identified this man as Karthigesu Sivapakyam, as his name was engraved on his wristwatch. The woman was soon identified to be Jean Perera Sinnappa. She was only 31 years old and left behind 3 young children. Now, all of their personal belongings have been accounted for and nothing seemed to have been stolen, so this was obviously not a burglary gone wrong. So who would do this to Jean, and most importantly, why? Once Karthigesu regained his consciousness, he told investigators that he and Jean were on their way home from a party at the Abad Century Hotel Piano Lounge, where they both had a few drinks. He stopped the car because he had to relieve himself, and before he could even do so, he was approached by 3 men from behind. He was knocked unconscious and has no idea what happened next. Now, there were a few witnesses. According to a couple, Adrian and Valerie De Silva, who were familiar to Jean's late husband, they saw Jean in her car at around 11:10 p.m. So this was only a few minutes before Karthigesu was spotted by the airline employees. According to them, Karthigesu was driving, and Jean, who was on the passenger seat, even smiled at them and said hi when they pulled up alongside them at a junction. After passing this stoplight, both cars went their separate ways. At 11:20 p.m., a Malaysian Airlines employee passed by Jean's car that was parked on the side of the road. However, he didn't see anyone around the car, not even Carthigesu. At 11:40 p.m., another Malaysian Airlines employee sees Carthigesu on the side of the road but doesn't stop because he got freaked out. At 11:45 p.m., just 5 minutes later, a guy named Abdul passes by the scene and sees no one around the car. So, pretty confusing. It was a pretty confusing timeline of events, but this was coming from different people. Now, a few days after the attack, the autopsy report for Jean Perera Sinnappa was released, and it showed that she had 2 deep stab wounds on her abdomen that pierced her lungs and liver. She also had wounds on her neck and arms, and based on the injuries that she had sustained, the coroner suggested that whoever killed Jean was not a professional or trained assassin and struggled to take her life. Now, aside from this, there was almost no evidence. No one witnessed the actual murder, and no murder weapon was ever found. All the authorities could find were blood splatters. There was, of course, blood on the windshield, the passenger side door, and the floorboards underneath the passenger seat. There was no blood found on the driver's side, and it seemed that Jean had been attacked from the back seat. A shoe print was found on the passenger seat, further indicating that Jean was indeed attacked from behind, and that the perpetrator stepped on the driver's seat for stability. Not a single drop of blood was found on Carthigesu. Now, sniffer dogs were brought to the scene of the crime, and they tracked a scent around the car and the nearby pond. But that's pretty much it. On April 8th, 1979, 2 days after the murder, Jean Perera Sinnappa was laid to rest. There were investigators who attended her burial, and they all noted how calm and collected Carthigesu was. And they, of course, found this quite unusual and somewhat eerie. But if he did do this, why? What was his motive? According to Carthigesu, he had no idea who would do such a thing to Jean. She was a gem. She was well-liked and had no enemies. So why would someone end her life in such a brutal manner? The police decided to search the Sinnappa home where Jean, her kids, mother-in-law, and Carthigesu all lived. And in Jean's room, the authorities found a total of 19 letters that revealed the former beauty queen's double life. They discovered that she had been having an affair with a Sri Lankan doctor named Narada Warnasurya. The contents of these letters were said to be very sensual and sexual in nature. They were also able to figure out that Jean and Dr. Warnasurya had been secretly seeing each other for the past few months after they had met during one of his work trips to Kuala Lumpur in 1978. Now, Dr. Warnasurya was married and had a young daughter, but he was never considered as a suspect because at the time of the crime, he wasn't even in the country. He was back in Sri Lanka. This discovery, however, now gave Carthigesu a motive. Of course, he would be devastated about the love of his life having an affair. I mean, he liked Jean ever since they met. Then she ended up marrying his brother, and he had to watch their relationship unfold over the years before he finally had a chance to be with her after his brother's passing. And now she was having an affair behind his back. On April 26, 1979, Carthigesu Sivapakyam was arrested for the murder of Jean Perera Sinnappa. He, however, denies any type of involvement and even claims that he actually saw the license plate of the perpetrator but forgot because he was knocked unconscious. Now, the police suggested for him to undergo narco analysis, wherein he would be injected with a truth serum. Now, initially he agreed but backed out at the very last minute because he was afraid that he might say things that had been hammered into him by the actual murderers, and that he would confess to something that he didn't do. Now, during a different interrogation, he told the police of his version of events. However, This did not add up and was completely different from his initial story. He initially told the investigators that he had no idea what happened as he was struck in the head and was knocked unconscious. However, in this new version of events, he says that two men held him back and forced him to watch another man kill Jean. Him changing his story so suddenly set alarms to investigators. Of course, why was he lying? And even more incriminating, whenever he was questioned, Carthigesu would always refer to Jean as that woman, and he would often do so using an angry tone. On May 9, 1979, Carthigesu Sivapakyam was charged with Jean Perera Sinnappa's murder. More than a year later, on June 16, 1980, the long-awaited trials began, and the jury consisted of 7 men. Now, during the hearing, it was revealed that despite claiming to have been struck on the head hard enough to lose consciousness, there were no signs of any injuries or head trauma found on Carthigesu. And according to multiple witness testimonies who had seen him laying near the car, they found him in different positions, possibly in an attempt to finally attract a passerby to discover the scene. Another witness, a relative of Jean's named Bandulananda Jayatilake, also stated that he went to the Sinnappa home 10 days after the murder to check on Jean's kids. And according to him, as he and Carthigesu were talking, a detective arrived and talked to Carthigesu in private. He did not hear what this conversation was about, but when the detective left, Carthigesu was visibly upset and suddenly blurted out, "Worse comes to worse, I will admit it and go in. The bitch did not deserve to live." Aside from this, all police had was circumstantial evidence. There wasn't anything linking Carthigesu to the crime aside from the fact that him and Jean were together when it happened. Now, an unreleased letter from Jean to Dr. Warnasurya was also shown in court. In this letter, Jean wrote about how she wanted to end things with the Sri Lankan doctor as she was in love with Carthigesu and had plans of marrying him. The defense team also suggested that if Carthigesu did murder Jean, it would be impossible for him to kill her, wash himself off at the nearby pond, change his clothes, discard of his bloodied clothing and the murder weapon, compose himself, and come back to the scene all within a span of 30 minutes. It was highly unlikely. However, 5 out of the 7 members of the jury still found him guilty. Upon being given the verdict and being sentenced to death by hanging, Carthigesu kept a straight face. 4 days later, he filed for an appeal but failed. However, 10 months after his sentencing, the star witness Bandulananda Jayatilake suddenly confessed that he lied and never heard Carthigesu say that Jean did not deserve to live. He says that he lied in order to give Jean justice because he strongly believed that Carthigesu was somehow involved in her killing. But his conscience was eating him up, knowing that Carthigesu would be given the death penalty for a crime that he possibly did not commit. Carthigesu Sivapakyam was acquitted and was set free after spending more than 2 years in prison. Bandulananda Jayatilake pleaded guilty to perjury and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Up until now, no one has been held accountable for the murder of Jean Perera Sinnappa. This has now turned into a cold case and no one has been put to justice after 43 years. Now, personally, due to all of these circumstances, I honestly believe that Carthigesu was involved in this, and it is possible that he did not have any blood on him, and this happened quickly because he hired hitmen to do it. However, everyone is innocent until proven guilty, so that's just my 2 cents on it. I'm not even sure if he's still alive to this day. I mean, is it? Yeah, if he were still alive today, he would probably be in his 90s or 80s. I'm not so good at math. However, I really want to hear your thoughts on this. Do you think he did it? Do you think he hired someone else to do it? Or do you think that he had nothing to do with it at all? As usual, thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you guys on my next video.